The Tree of Life, an original story written and performed by William Baker. I grew up on the last vestiges of what once was my father's family farm. The land was purchased by my great-great-great-great-grandfather in 1860. By the time I was born 127 years later, the family had long since stopped farming it themselves. Over the decades, a parcel here and a parcel there had been sold off to neighbors, who developed the land into homesteads of their own. Growing up, we had 21 acres, split between my grandmother and my father. Of those 21 combined acres, about 15 of them were leased to local farmers who cultivated the land on a crop rotation scheme, alternating between corn and soybeans annually. I remember once hearing corn's height at the 4th of July described to be as high as an elephant's eye. I was incredulous. To this day I still have my doubts. Either the elephants inhabiting my imagination are much larger than their real-life counterparts, or I am grossly misunderstanding how high corn grows. Of course, to someone who, at the time, could count their age on a single hand, everything is elephantine and towering. During the summers of corn, I stayed out of the fields, for I heard that corn stalks were a favored home to spiders. With spiders, I am indifferent at best. I take the stance of I don't bother you, you don't bother me. If I find one in my home, I won't kill it. I'll just scoop it up in a napkin, tell it thank you for visiting, and take it outdoors into its own habitat. I felt like if I entered the corn, I would be the one in violation of our social contract. I was a cautious child. I knew I wouldn't get lost in my own backyard, yet, on the other hand, what if I got lost in my own backyard, casting my fate to the spiders? During one summer of corn, a neighbor of ours was not nearly as concerned about the spiders as I was. An older man with Alzheimer's disease. He'd been missing for a few days. Eventually, he was found with a single self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head in our cornfield. I wasn't allowed to go outside. I remember glimpsing from the window a small police presence, yellow police tape with black lettering, news crews, missing local man found dead in field. Hey, that's our house on TV. I don't know how his remains were located. He was quite a ways back, so it's not like someone just stumbled upon him. Perhaps his carrion had attracted local wildlife, triggering an investigation. Or maybe one of my parents noticed a smell and reported it. I never thought to ask. As a child, I was often visited by spirits in the night. They were mostly malevolent, but their presence still unnerved me. Our house was a ranch-style home, with the living room and kitchen on the west side, a bathroom and 2 bedrooms in the middle, and my parents' bedroom, my dad's desk room, and garage on the east side. The spiritual activity became stronger the further east you went in the house. There's never been much activity on the west side, in the living room and kitchen. My parents' room, at the end of the long hall, was the epicenter of activity, the strongest and most vivid sightings happening in and around their chambers, with the spirits losing their power of manifestation the further away from the bedroom you were. I couldn't understand how someone could have shot themselves in such close proximity to our house, and we were none the wiser. A gun is loud. I've seen movies. How could we not have heard a gunshot? Bang! We'd look up from our pork chops. What was that? We'd ask, but no, nothing like that. He'd been there for days, the spiders, no doubt, wrapping him in silk, feasting on his life-giving juices, the ones he no longer needed, mummifying him in the process like an Egyptian prince. May Osiris welcome him with open arms. I saw a picture of him on the news. Old man, white hair, white beard. We went to Old Country Buffet a lot. It doesn't exist anymore, fallen victim to changing economic and societal times. We live in a more health-conscious world. The concept of all you can eat does not jive with smaller, healthier plates with fresh, locally sourced ingredients. The idea of a buffet in a post-COVID world with all of the touching and breathing and sneezing is just too much for some people to stomach. We were known at our Old Country Buffet, regulars. I won a coloring contest once, taking pride of place on the wall and a free meal to boot. There were a number of buffet islands, salad bar, 3 hot bars, desserts, and a fountain drink station situated in the middle of the seating area, dispensers on both sides. Our table of choice was the one directly to the left of the fountain drink station, although the root beer tap was on the right side of the station, necessitating extra steps. Sitting next to the drinks gave us a great triangulation between the main hot bar, the desserts, and of course the drinks. The salad bar was surrounded by a mirrored wall, and a great clear crystal sneeze guard suspended from the ceiling, protecting the vegetables. The island was painted in cool colors, whites and blues, the lights pure white, 5,000 degrees Kelvin, to match the chilled nature of the food. The hot buffets were decorated in warmer colors, wood panels, dark greens, their lights warm, 3,000 degrees Kelvin. I knew bugs dined on decaying humans. When you die, you become worm food. Creatures crawl into what used to be your nose, and they probably come out of a place where your eyeball used to be. After seeing the picture of the dead man with his white beard on the local TV news, I said to my mother, the ants are probably lined up at his beard, like at the salad bar, the color temperature of his beard matching that of the buffet lighting, making a connection in my small brain. I was sent to my room to think things over. It was after our neighbor's exit that the spirit activity kicked up. My dad worked late, a projectionist at a multiplex, not coming home until 1:30 in the morning. After the final movies of the night had ended, the film re-spooled for the next matinee. Because of this, I'd often fall asleep with my mother in the east wing of the house, and my father would move me to my bed when he arrived home, scooping me up in his big, strong daddy arms, as he'd say. It was on one of these nights that my most vivid haunting experience occurred. In typical Hollywood fashion, the specters arrived at the stroke of midnight. Classical ghosts, white, ethereal, floating. They paraded into my parents' room, opening the door, welcoming themselves in like they owned the place. There was an accompanying soundtrack of classical music. These weren't ghosts of people, at least people that we knew. Although we have, as of this writing, at least 5 canonical deaths recorded since the property has been in my family's stewardship. No, these ghosts were the anonymous sort, less along the lines of the ghost of Marley and more reminiscent of Jasper, Boo, Moss, and Grub from the 1937 Mickey Mouse classic Lonesome Ghosts. They mostly went about their own business doing ghostly things like wailing, rattling chains, banging drums, blowing trumpets, rummaging drawers, and generally carrying on. They were as aware of me as I was aware of them. However, I got the impression that they felt towards me as I felt towards the spiders. I continued to experience ghostly phenomenon until I moved away for college. I would never call our house haunted, just active. About 100 yards directly behind the picture window in the kitchen stood a massive old tree. Some people know for trees, and I am not one of them. The extent of my dendrology begins and ends with is a Christmas tree or is not a Christmas tree. The tree that stood outside of our kitchen window was not a Christmas tree. It was the other kind, the ones with the leaves. My dad would tell me about when he was a child, that he would play with his brother and his cousins under that tree. He always referred to it as his tree. When I was a child, I would play at the base of the tree as my father before me. On the north-facing side at its base there was a perfect little burrow that one could sit in almost like a cave. You could sit in the shadow and shade of the tree, protected from the sun and elements, but also protected from direct line of sight from the house. A boy was free to let his imagination run wild when in that spot. I was essentially an only child. My sisters are 15 and 17 years older than me. By the time I was big enough to stay out of the corn and sit under the tree, my eldest sister had kids of her own, and my middle sister was busy being single and in her 20s, and this was before social media, so whatever she was up to is lost to time, shrouded in a mist of Zima. We had very few neighbors, and even fewer once they started to wander into the corn. Being essentially an only child on 21 acres of land, I had never been socialized. I wasn't feral, but I had never spent any significant amount of time around other kids until my parents betrayed me at 5 years old and shipped me off to preschool. I was not impressed with my new companions, and I've been uneasy and suspicious ever since. To make up for the solitude, I had an invisible friend named Doug. I never identified Doug as being one of the ghosts. But my dad always felt, he told me later, that Doug was someone from the other side, sent to keep me company. I did everything with Doug. Mother had bought an old metal swing set from a garage sale. It had a slide, a couple of swings, a trapeze, and a glider. I'd push Doug on the swing, although he wasn't much help when it came time to push me. We'd take turns on the slide. We'd adventure through the yard. He'd go on errands with us. We left Doug at the bank once, and sobbing, I made my mother go back for him. Then one day, Doug was gone. No note, no goodbye, gone, just like that. We would have put his picture on a carton of milk, but he wasn't particularly photogenic. I still miss sitting with him under that large, old tree. To a child, that tree was imposing forever, until one day it wasn't. This not a Christmas tree was Y-shaped. The base of it may be 5 feet tall, then two great, thick trunks diverged, each growing in its own direction. It almost looked like a giant had been buried upside down up to his waist with his legs sticking out in the air. My dad always said that this tree's life was connected to his own. They were tied together. When I was in junior high, the farm lease expired and the farmers no longer cultivated the land. It took a few seasons of mowing and pulling a great big roller drum filled with water behind the mower to flatten out the rows, but eventually all 21 acres were verdant, flat fields of grass. It would take a team of 5 of us, my grandmother and step-grandfather, my dad, my mom, and myself, 8 hours once a week to get the thing mowed. These were always happy times, to be out in nature soaking in the fresh air and sunshine. Very few joys have ever touched the happiness I felt from looking out over the freshly mowed land after a long day's work. The evening sky, pink and purple and blue. We'd all pile into a car after admiring our work and the watercolor sky, and go to town and enjoy a meal of Taco Bell, whose corporate colors at the time were very reminiscent of the colors found in those soft midsummer sunsets. By the time we were home, the lightning bugs had come out to share their light show with us while we sat on the screened-in porch, reveling in the glory that was nature and the satisfaction of a hard day's work. One day my dad's nose sprung a leak, great rivers of blood flooding out of his nostrils, everyone rushing for something to sop up the red liquid. Into the kitchen we hastened to grab the paper towels, only to look out the window to see the eastern trunk of the Y fallen to the ground, leaving half a crooked tree behind. The giant's leg amputated. It turns out the tree had been rotting from the inside, likely for decades. Aging, unseen. My dad took it as a sign. So did my mother. Not long after that, she bought him for his 60th birthday a burial plot. Every year after that, on his birthday, he'd tell us that Mom wasn't going to get him anything this year because he still hadn't used what she had gotten him for his 60th birthday. As I got bigger, the tree, still imposing, didn't seem as eternal anymore. It still cast a shadow, although a bit diminished because of the amount of itself it lost. Every year, fewer and fewer leaves would come back in the spring. By this time, I had long since lost my friend Doug, and I was spending less and less time playing make-believe in the yard. The marvelous spot on the north side of the tree lost its appeal. I made up for these losses by mowing for hours on end, Discman on my lap, headphones on my ears, singing my heart out, contented in my own little world. It wasn't until years later that my mother mentioned that she always enjoyed hearing me sing. I couldn't ever make out the words, she'd say, but you would just sing and sing and sing. I was mortified. It never occurred to me that I was louder than the lawnmower. There was a wet spot on the northeasternmost edge of the property. Any time it rained, that corner would turn into a swamp. When I was in high school, my dad read that weeping willow trees, not a Christmas tree, were good for really wet areas with all of those leaves and tenderly branches. It had a massive root system and required a lot of moisture to keep everything satiated. He planted one no bigger than a yardstick in the center of that swampy area. Spindly thing, looked kind of like a weed. He protected it with a tomato cage. My mom didn't like it. I don't remember why. But when it came to trees, she pretty much let my dad do what he wanted. He was always collecting and saving evergreen saplings, is a Christmas tree, that he'd find around the yard. He wanted to plant them along the property edge to make a natural fence to help provide privacy as more and more subdivisions were beginning to box us in. Mother regarded this at worst as an exercise in futility and at best better than a drinking habit. Eventually, I moved away to college, got my own place, got married, started my own family. His tree fell. My dad started seeing shadow people in the east wing of the house. "They're nice, they're friendly," he'd say. "They're just here preparing me for what comes next, getting me ready. They'll help me when I go." He developed a spot on his face. Looked like a pimple or an ingrown hair. He ignored it, brushed past it. "It's nothing to worry about, just a blemish." It started to grow. He hid the thing under a Band-Aid. More spots appeared. They looked like small volcanoes there on his face. Turns out it was a type of skin cancer called squamous cell carcinoma. Soaking in all that fresh air and sunshine may not have been such a great idea after all. He had the spots removed surgically. He looked good. The scars healed without a trace. It looked like half of his face had been lifted. I told him he got off lucky because a lot of people his age go for expensive cosmetic surgery, paying large sums right out of pocket, sums that would otherwise be left possibly as an inheritance to their heirs. But by going the cancer route, he was able to have his insurance pay for the procedure. Of course, he was lopsided, but this about matched his level of vanity. If he wanted to impress people with his youthful, taut visage, he'd simply stand with the right side of his face towards them. If he wanted to project humbleness of a man aging naturally and gracefully, as the Creator intended, he'd stand with his left side facing out. Within 2 months of the surgery, the cancer came back full of fury, as if it had something to prove. In the space between November and February, the new tumors went from non-existent to bean-sized to softball-sized, large, open, weeping wounds. But the doctors assured us, "Don't worry, this type of cancer is slow-moving and non-aggressive." We were not eased. A 10-inch by 3-inch piece of milky white skin from his right quadricep, a piece of his body never once exposed to harmful UV rays, grafted onto his face. Looked like someone stapled a feminine hygiene product to him. A month of recovery, 6 weeks of radiation, but his decline continued. Then the cancer came back for a third and final time, rotting from the inside, aging unseen. My father felled. All my life, my dad was as constant and forever and sturdy and strong as that tree of his. He was the safe place, the place of imagination and playtime. He was always there weathering the elements, until he wasn't. The consistency of his presence no longer to be counted on. A change in the landscape, subtle but unmistakable. His protective shade gone, but his shadow continuing to cast over me. My mother was in the room with him when he passed, their bedroom, the most active room in the house. I was in the next room over, a room that had, at one time or another, been my oldest sister's room, my middle sister's room, and then my room, with its orange shag carpet. We all matriculated into it when someone else moved out. My middle sister was in the living room, asleep on the couch, the least active location. When my grandmother, my dad's mom, died, she was alone in hospice. This was in keeping with how she lived her life. Didn't want to be a bother, didn't want to be a burden. We were all there at hospice. My dad and his stepdad, my mom, my uncle and his wife, my sisters and their families, my wife and I, just waiting for her to poof out of existence. But she waited until we'd all gone back to Mom and Dad's for dinner. I was sitting on the couch in the living room when I heard the banshee's wail from directly over me. It sounded like Santa and his reindeer landing on the roof. A great clattering noise. I looked around and no one else seemed to have noticed it. I didn't say anything, not wanting to admit what I knew in that moment was the truth. It was then that the phone rang. My dad answered. It was a cordless handset. Hello? He stood in the middle of the living room, everyone around him like he was a campfire. Their chatter stopped. Yes, this is her son. Yes. Okay. He hung up. Nana was gone. I already knew that. I'd heard the banshee and the Kochebauer. I was asleep when Dad died. Mom woke me up. It's 3 a.m, and your dad is gone. He'd been unresponsive for the better part of 2 days. He had a feeding tube. That evening before he died, we poured whiskey into the tube. Why not? He wasn't driving anywhere. A last drink with Dad. I didn't hear the death coach that night. But the evening after his death, while working on his eulogy in my childhood bedroom, my first one, the one with the green shag carpet, the one I was in before I graduated into the big bedroom with the orange shag, I heard his voice in my head, instructions for the funeral. I texted my sister the instructions I had just received. She was 45 minutes away at the time, back at her own house, gone home after Dad had been wheeled out by the funeral people. Nothing left to see here. I'm going back home to my husband. At the exact moment I texted her, she texted me, with the same instructions, saying she had just heard Dad's voice in her head. Not haunted, just active. Took him 21 years to use his 60th birthday present. I'm recording this on what would have been his 84th birthday. We're down to 7 acres these days, McMansions on all sides. Dad's evergreens is a Christmas tree, all grown up, blocking out the encroachment of progress. The willow tree, not a Christmas tree, is huge now. My oldest sister and my 2 daughters cleared out all of the undergrowth one summer, decorated it with found objects and found furniture, fairy lights. Alice and the White Rabbit would be at home within its cool shade and dappled sunlight, a soft rustling of the leaves as the wind dances about the tendrils. A good place to nap. The girls call it their hideout. They play there, hold meetings, perform music and creative dance numbers, host friends. If the tree in the backyard was Dad's tree, then the willow tree is Papa's tree, his ground beha, his tree of life. All things are connected. Life, death, rebirth, father, son, grandchild. The leaves fall off and die, providing nutrients for the roots, which brings life to the new spring leaves. I used to think that I was living in my dad's shadow, but as I watched the girls play in their hideout, the tree that Papa unknowingly planted for them 20 years before, I realize that it's not his shadow that I'm living in, but rather his protective shade. We are the pieces of himself that have fallen to the ground. We are not him, but of him. We are reforming and uprising, carrying his legacy, forging our own, our faces ever pointed towards the sun.